Hello everyone, today we are going to import Hope Estheim into the ORK. Let's start by opening the ORK Framework editor and let's create in the world section scene object types. Let's add a new one and let's call it NPC. We can leave everything as it is for now, and then let's go to scene objects, create a new one, and let's call it Hope Estheim. Short name Hope, and from the base settings in the type we change it to NPC. Let's save the changes and let's close the ORK Framework editor. Next, let's import the assets that we made in the other video with about importing XPS characters with Blender. So let's import this one. Let's find it. Hope Estheim. To keep things organized, I will move this folder inside the game folder, meshes, and we have enemies, lining. Let's create a new folder and let's call it characters or NPCs. It will do. So let's go back to the assets folder and drag that one inside the characters. There we go. So if we see, we have already our mesh, which is rig to humanoid. So let's create or drag it into the scene. And one thing that is annoying me a little bit is the shadow quality. So let's fix that for once. So let's go to the project settings, graphics, I believe, no, quality. And from here we see these shadow settings. So let's, since we are already in ultra mode, let's bump it up. So let's put shadow distance, let's say 30. Stable fleet, okay. For cascade, high resolution, very high resolution. Hard shadows. Yeah, much better. What else? Yeah, looks better now. Okay, so let's start building our prefab. For the prefab ORK framework, the mandatory it requires is a character controller for NPCs that are going to be moved by the ORK framework AI. So let's add it and let's change these settings to, in the center, let's put it in 1.8, then the radius 0.26 and the height 1.6. Yes. The next we are going to add is a scene object, because later on we want to this NPC to be handled and found by ORK Framework, and we can deal quest items and other things. So we require, or we need to add to this object a scene object, and from here we have this scene object drop down, so we can select Hope Estheim. As you can see from here, we can later on check variable condition, quest conditions that we will be using in order to control or manage the dialogues between Hope and Lightning. There we go. Of course, as always, I like to rename this one, so let's give it a P for Prefab, Hope, and then let's drag it into our resources, Prefab. We have a character folder already here, so let's create another folder and let's name it NPCs, and let's drag the prefab here to create a new one, original prefab. So we already have an instance of this prefab in the scene, so it is completely safe to change the rotation and position of the transform to zero out. So whenever we drag it into another scene, although Hope is always here in the arc, it will be zero out. So now if we hit play, okay, we have Lightning and there is Hope in a pose doing absolutely nothing. So let's add an idle animation to him. So in the animator we need to create an animator controller for him. Let's go to the character Hope Estheim and let's add here a folder, animator, and let's create a new animator, animator controller, and let's call it Hope AC for animator controller. Double click it and let's find any of the idle animation that we already have, for example from the dynamic sword anim set, or if you have anyone from Mixamo or another package. Let's use the idle unequip, for example, and let's drag it up. Always check foot IK to avoid the foot sliding. So let's go back to the scene now, and instead of modifying the prefab here, I will do open prefab. Remember that we already zero out the transform, so let's find our animator and drag it up. Close the prefab and let's check it out. I already fixed when I created this package for Hope the jaw issue that I showed in the last video. Okay. Alrighty, let's continue. So the next step to make him more alive is I will add a head tracking so he can track the position of Lightning while he's talking to her. And for that what we are going to do is to import from the package manager the new animation rigging, which is already for this version of Unity, is not in preview anymore. So let's wait to this to load. Let's switch to Unity registry and let's search here animation and then we have this animation rigging. So let's install this package. Okay, so once installed, let's close the package manager and let's click on Hope. I will click on Select to go to the Prefab and open Prefab to edit the Prefab alone. Okay, the first step is to go into the root of the game object Hope and add a rig builder component. The rig builder is asking us for a rig layer. So for that, let's create an empty game object, child of the root, and let's call it head rig. And let's add a rig component to it. So you see this warning, rig component is not referenced or not active in the rig builder component. So let's go back to the rig builder component and add this head rig to it. And the warning disappears. The next step is to add a head constraint or the multi-aim constraint that we handle the head rotation. So for that, let's create another object. Child of the head rig. And let's call it head aim logic. And let's add to it the multi-aim constraint, and it is asking for a constraint object. So here we need to search in our armature hierarchy for the head bone. Let's see, left arm, neck, head. It will depend on the structure of your character, of course. Then this multi-aim constraint is asking for the source object. This is the object that it will look at actually. So let's close this up and let's create another child object and let's call it aim target. And what we want to do with this one is go to the head aim logic and add it to the source objects. So by default, this game object is in the root. So let's move it up and let's put it a little bit away from the head. And you can see by selecting this object, since it's already referenced by the multi-constraint, we have this tool here, animation rigging aim target. So if we click in the plus button, we can add a locator effector in order to make it easier for us to see it in the scene view. So let's click in this one and let's type ball effector, and then we have this nice circle ball. Okay, so now if we were to have a test, we can see we have autosave. We can just close the prefab and then we have it here. So let's hit play. Let's go back to the scene view, click on the effector, and you can see it's already moving the head, tracking this ball effector. But again, but what we really need to do is to track Lightning's head. And also we are going to fix later on the issue that the constraint acts weird like so. But if we go backwards, yeah, he just broke his neck. So to make this work as generic as possible, what we are going to do is create a couple of scripts in order to handle point of interest that will work with NPCs in general and also for lining later on. So let's go to our scripts folder and let's make here a new script and call it GameInstance, and this is going to be a singleton that will run from the start of the game. So instead of having game objects with this point of interest script searching for all other point of interest in the scene, we are going to let them auto-register them into this game instance. So let's open up this in Visual Studio and let's start coding. Okay, so first let's create our singleton pattern. So let's say public static game instance null. This is private actually. Private. Then we need to create a property public static of the same type, game instance, uppercase instance, and from here we do a getter. So if our instance is null, we create a new one, new game object, sorry, not new yet, instance. We need to find if there is any existing instance already in the scene. Game instance. If there is none, then we create a new one. New game object. Instance.name, let's call it game instance. Game object. Now we can assign this new game object to our instance. So game object add component of game instance, and we call the don't destroy unload, so it will persist. And finally we need to return our instance. Save. Then in the awake method we need to check if for example we are loading a scene that already contains this game object. So if instance is null, we can proceed to assign the existing instance to this one. We call again don't destroy and load. Game object. Otherwise we destroy the existing for the new instance that we found. Let's go back to Unity to let it compile. And after compilation, let's add a new script and let's call it point of interest. And open up in Visual Studio. So from here we are going to call the start method and query the list, this list of objects from our game instance. So now that we already have created this new class, we can go back to the game instance and create a public list of point of interest let's call it boys, and from here we need control dot to get using system collection generic, and since we already have our public list that we can access from the game instance, we can go back to the point of interest, add the start method, and from here we check if our game instance list of point of interest does not contains this one, us, then we'll add ourself to the list. Simple as that. Let's go back to Unity, let it compile, and to start building our test, let's select the ORK game starter game object, and let's add the game instance component to it. Later on we are going to add it, of course, into our main screen menu. The first thing that we are loading when we run the game, of course, but for testing purposes let's add it here for now. And the next step, since we have our point of interest, is to add this component to every object that we want the NPC to look at. So for this we need to go to our prefabs, garbs, then we have dark muse. So let's open the dark muse prefab, and from here, from the Mixamo hierarchy, let's select the head and let's add this new component to the head bone. Scripts, point of interest. Let's do the same for the other garb. Equilibrium, prefab, open prefab, select the head bone, and let's add the new script. Okay, save this in. We are not done yet, because if you remember, we have the rig builder. Let's open the prefab. The rig builder, then we have the rig, the multi-aims constraint, but right now its aim is this aim target. So we need to find a way to switch our point of interest in place of this aim target, and for that we are going to create another script that will handle that. So the script that we are going to create is going to be called head tracking controller, and by no means this is something I created. I got inspiration, and most of the logic, if not every logic here, is coming from this channel from Pablo Makes. So I will put the link in the description. They have he has a lot of good content, of course, for you to check it out, please. So let's open up this script, and I'm just going to paste the actual content of the script. So what we are doing here is creating a reference to the head rig component, to the rig component, sorry, coming from the animations rig namespace. We add a transform to get the target that we will looking at. Then there is the radius of the distance of the object to look at, which means that Hope is going to start looking at this object when the target enters this radius. Then we have the max angle, is the constraint in order to rotate the head and not look like the exorcist. And then we have this other variable which will store the speed of which we want the head to snap back to original position. Since we are dealing with ORK Framework and spawning the character, I'm doing this in the late update. If your character is already in the scene, then you can put it in the update. Or if you have rigid bodies and physics in place, then try to do it in the fixed update. The next step is to check if the target is null, then we just exit the update cycle. We don't need to check anything else. And as you can see here, we are not having a local list of point of interest, but querying the game instance. That in this case, since we added the script to the head of the lining garbs, they all be registering automatically when the game starts. And there is a logic here, the mathematic logic, in order to check the angle and the transformed position. And finally, here is where the rotation is being assigned to this tracking object, if any is found. So let's save the script. I will put a link in the description, of course, to download these scripts for you. Let Unity compile. So we need to create a new game object here. Create empty. Let's call it head tracking. And add the component to it. So it's asking us to add some objects. So we have the head rig, which is the head rig game object. We have the target, in this case is our aim target, that we're going to switch there later on. And then the properties that we mentioned before. I already did a test, and actually for this one, for me looks better with a 3 speed and the max angle as 80. So save the prefab and let's give it a try. Okay, so lightning is here. The first thing we need to check is that in the Don't Destroy or Load or Game Starter we have Game Instance, and as you can see the point of interest was registered automatically. So if we go near Hope, he look at us. If we get outside of this max angle range, he snap back to the original position of the head. There we go. One thing I need to fix though is in Hope Prefab. So let's go back there. We added this head tracking game object, but it's in the foot. So let's drag it right in the head, a little bit forward to the head, because this is the one that is going to be calculating the logic. So let's give it one more test. Let's maximize the screen this time. There we go, much better. And also the shadows look pretty good. Okay people, thank you for watching, and next video we are going to start building the dialogue and NPC logic where Hope is randomly walking in this area, and the dialogue sequence when lightning first appears here in the ARK. So thank you for watching, and see you next week.